Bro, the whole billionaire fantasy dies when he says money wasn't the point. Ha! Imagine buying jets and then realizing your brain is still broke. That's what hit me most. Not the mansion stuff, the burnout stuff. 22-hour days until you're falling asleep on the desk is not wealth. That's just very expensive exhaustion. And the wild part is he started as a dishwasher and car seller. That immigrant angle makes the whole thing feel earned, not inherited. But then you hear him talk about impact on Earth and you're like, okay, show me. Billionaires always say impact after they buy the third house. Still, real estate is kind of the least magical rich person story. Like, he saw housing demand because he personally needed housing. That's not genius in a superhero way, that's just hungry and observant. And then he scaled into apartments, which is such a brutal flex. Nothing says ambition like owning where other people sleep. Haha, that line sounds evil until you remember everyone needs a roof. Exactly, and that's why real estate billionaires feel more legible than tech guys. Wait, did you catch how he talks about money like it's almost boring now? That's usually when someone has had too much of it. But nearly being suicidal after getting everything is just dark. That part made the whole thing stop being a lifestyle story. Because then it's not about jets, it's about identity collapsing. What do you do when the scoreboard doesn't fix your head? Apparently you buy a better desk and keep working. No, but seriously, that 20-hour grind is insane. People romanticize that like it's discipline and not self-destruction. Discipline is good until it becomes a personality disorder with a calendar. That's a brutal sentence, but yeah. I kept thinking about the line where he says everybody wants to talk about money. Of course he doesn't want to talk about money anymore. Money almost killed the mood. The pivot to health and strength actually feels more real. Because if your body is collapsing, your empire is just a liability with a view. A liability with a view is crazy. But do you buy the whole inner wealth thing from rich guys? Sometimes it sounds like a rebrand for having already won. Fair, but I think pain can make the rebrand genuine. Especially if you're actually staring at the ceiling wondering what the point is. That part is hard to fake. And his anti-communist stance fits the immigrant founder archetype. Yeah, because if you came from scarcity, anything that smells like redistribution feels personal. But people hear billionaire talking about freedom, and they immediately hear self-justification. To be fair, sometimes it is self-justification. Haha, yeah, the delivery is never innocent. What I liked is he didn't pretend success made him different from anyone else. The whole, he eats, he sleeps, he gets sick thing is so basic but strong. It knocks the billionaire myth down to human scale immediately. Basically, the richest guy in the room is still a guy. Shocking update, man has teeth. That's the whole trick, though. People project godhood onto money. And then they get annoyed when the god is tired and confused. Because the fantasy needs them to be above suffering. But maybe that's why the story lands now, because billionaire hatred is louder than billionaire worship. And also more honest, let's be real. The weirdest part is he seems obsessed with routine now. Like the body training, the mental discipline, all of it. That's almost what every burned-out, powerful person eventually discovers. That chaos feels impressive until it becomes loneliness. Haha, and the jet can't meditate for you. Very expensive air travel, still bad therapy. Do you think strict routines actually save people? Sometimes they do, if the routine is serving life and not ego. But rich guys can turn self-improvement into another control obsession. They start healing and accidentally build a new religion around hydration. Yes, with a podcast and a membership site. Still, his legacy talk felt less fake than the usual billionaire legacy talk. Because he isn't just saying family name, he's talking about being useful. That's a real shift from accumulation to contribution. And honestly, that's the most interesting rich person story possible. Not the yacht, the nervous breakdown. Yeah, the yacht is the trailer. The actual movie is what happens when getting everything still isn't enough. And that question is bigger than billionaires. It's just louder with them. Everyone has that version of the bank account fantasy in some smaller form. Exactly. Just fewer zeros and less private aviation. I do love that even at that level, he still sounds like a guy who worked too hard. Maybe that's why the story works, because it's not glamorous at its core. It's sweat, fear, insomnia, then maybe some peace. And that is a much better billionaire story than luxury porn. Luxury porn is brutal, but accurate. I keep coming back to that line about inner wealth. Because if you don't build that, every external win gets fragile. And maybe that's the only part of the story that actually ages well. The jets age, the apartments age, the body ages. The existential crisis remains vintage. That's annoyingly true. Anyway, that's the version of billionaire culture I can actually listen to. Not worship, not hate, just the messy human part. Yeah, the part where success doesn't protect you from being a person. That line about money not protecting you from being a person is the whole movie. Like, congratulations, you own 3 planes and still have nerves. And he was not born in that world, which makes it crazier. Immigrant, dishwasher, car sales, then apartments. That's such a violent jump in status. From scrubbing plates to buying buildings, the American menu is insane. And he basically found the cheat code in housing demand. That's the part I respect, honestly. He saw immigrants needed homes and built around that need. Which is better than some guy inheriting a trust fund and discovering golf. Brutal, but fair. But then he gets to the top and says he was miserable. That's the part people skip when they fantasize about billions. They think the number fixes the internal noise. Turns out the number just gets a nicer chair. And a bigger chair, apparently, with better leg room. He says he was working 22 hours a day, too. Falling asleep at the desk and just waking up to keep working? That sounds less like ambition and more like self-erasure. People romanticize that grind because they only see the results. But if your life is only work, what exactly did you win? That's the nasty question, yeah. And then there's the suicide part, which changes the whole tone. Because now it is not a flex story, it is a survival story. Right. The mansion is not magical if your mind is collapsing in it. The pool does not therapy you. The pool absolutely does not therapy you, no. But I do think people underestimate how lonely that top gets. Once everybody wants something from you, nobody is just around you. That's the billionaire tax no one talks about. Except his tax was probably less painful than ours. Okay, true. Different category of suffering. What did you make of him saying inner wealth matters more than the bank account? I mean, it sounds obvious until you actually have to live it. Then it stops being a quote and becomes a correction. Like he had to get punished by success before he believed it. Exactly. And that is always the annoying route. Nobody wants to learn the lesson through a near breakdown, but apparently, that is the syllabus. I also think his routine obsession matters here. Because discipline can be medicine, or it can be a cage. And rich guys love calling their cage a lifestyle. They put it in a nicer spreadsheet, and suddenly, it's wellness. Nicer spreadsheet is crazy. But seriously, if he rebuilt himself through health, that part feels real. Because a broken body makes a broken mind louder. And he seems to believe physical strength and mental strength are linked. Which is not some macho slogan if you actually train, sleep, and repeat. But rich people also confuse optimization with meaning. Yes, I had a perfect morning and still hated myself. That should be on a hoodie, honestly. The anti-communist part is interesting too, because he is very ideological about it. For an immigrant who built wealth from nothing, that probably feels personal. Like he sees ownership as proof of freedom. And he probably sees state control as the thing that kills initiative, which I get. But it can also get oversimplified fast. Right, because not every critique of billionaires is a secret love letter to communism. Exactly. There is room between eat the rich and, please, sir, may I have a helicopter? Society can hold two thoughts. I actually liked that he defined billionaire status as access to enough resources to make an impact. That is at least less stupid than, I have a yacht, therefore I am. Low bar, but still a bar. Because if the resources are only for consumption, it's kind of empty. Then you are just scaling appetite, not purpose. And appetite has no finishing line. That is the trap. But the apartment complex angle is the real business brain moment to me. Because he wasn't just buying luxury, he was solving a market he understood. That is how a lot of huge fortunes actually happen. Not magic, just brutal focus on a real need. And also timing, access, and probably luck that nobody likes admitting. Yes, the unsexy billionaire ingredients, work, timing, and luck. But I respect that he openly says the wealth did not save him, because that takes the shine off the myth. It makes success look heavier, not lighter. And maybe that is why people react so strongly to these stories, because they want the fantasy to stay intact. They do not want the mansion to come with a panic attack add-on. The premium package is just emotional damage. Still, I think there is something admirable about him turning around and talking about it, especially for men who only know how to measure themselves with outputs. Because if your self-worth is only revenue, every slow quarter feels like a moral failure. And that is a terrible way to live. It is. Do you think he actually found peace, or just a more sustainable obsession? Maybe both, which is almost more human. Peace is not always silence. Sometimes it is better priorities. That's a good line. I know, I should have charged myself for that one. But yeah, the whole thing lands because it refuses to make wealth the ending. It makes wealth the middle problem. And then asks what kind of person you become after the money arrives. Apparently, sometimes that person is exhausted and confused in a nicer coat. That's the most honest billionaire description yet. Yeah, and weirdly, it makes him more relatable. Not because he's ordinary, but because the problem is ordinary. Everybody is trying to feel enough somehow. That part is universal, even if the bank balance isn't. Very few of us have jet fuel in the budget, though. Thankfully, because I already have enough problems. Still, his story is a good reminder that external wins are only half the equation. Maybe the harder half is staying intact while you get them. And that is probably where the real wealth is hiding. Meanwhile, he is out here sleeping on a desk like a broken startup founder. 22 hours a day is not ambition anymore. That is a controlled collapse. The mansion is gorgeous, but the nervous system is filing a complaint. And that is the part people never price into wealth. They price the jet, the house, the car, the watch. Nobody puts mental health on the spreadsheet until it explodes. I do wonder if some billionaires confuse discipline with just being unable to stop. Like, congratulations, you built an empire and also a panic attack. But his immigrant story makes the whole thing sharper. He saw a housing gap because he lived the housing gap. That is the real edge, not some genius aura from a tower window. It is hard to romanticize a man who started by washing dishes. The myth gets annoying when the truth is just grind and insomnia. Still, that anti-communist streak is interesting. He is basically saying ownership matters because dependency feels personal to him. I get it, but billionaire politics always come with a little self-justification sauce. Self-justification sauce is exactly the menu item. Yet the health obsession after the breakdown feels more real than the politics. When somebody gets that close to the edge, the priorities usually get honest. Then suddenly it is sleep, training, routine, legacy, all the boring stuff. Which is hilarious because that is what the ultra-rich eventually discover like it is new. Eat 3 vegetables and call it wisdom. And somehow the internet wants that translated into a life hack carousel. But I do think there is something heavy in his line about inner wealth. Not as a slogan, just as a correction. Like, if your body and mind are wrecked, what exactly did you win? A bigger cage, maybe. Damn, that got dark fast. But that is kind of the point of these stories. The outside can look like victory while the inside is screaming. And people only notice once the scream gets loud enough. Anyway, he is living proof that money can solve problems and invent new ones. That is the most billionaire sentence ever. Yeah, but if he actually learned something from it, that matters. Because the rarest flex is not accumulation, it is stability. A calm billionaire is almost suspicious, though. Feels like they would be hiding 3 accountants and a sauna. Honestly, if I had that money, I would still want the sauna. You would keep the routine, right? I would try because without it, the empire owns you back. That is the real twist here. The building was never the final product. The person surviving inside it was.